Hey everybody, it's Craig Syracuse. Welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. Yes, we are at the Opera House, and today we're on Zoom. I'm sitting down with Jeff Gottesfeld. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor.
So Jeff, I appreciate, sitting down on Zoom, and I read 21 Steps again today before I came here. Fantastic book. And I wanted to, I've seen some of your work, I've read some of your books. If you could fill us in a little bit about your career and your journey as a writer.
Thanks so much. Well, I wasn't a writer coming right out of college. I went to law school, in fact, after doing some graduate study in sociology. I focused on writing and publishing. Maybe 2 years out of law school, I was working at a publishing company. And then my ex-wife is a very fine writer, and we started working together on teen books, of all things, mostly teen pop fiction. Which led to some other collaboration, writing for the stage. And then my big television break, I guess, was working for a show called Another World, which was a soap opera on ABC, which led to a gig with As the World Turns. And then ultimately, I was the associate head writer of The Young and the Restless. In between there were more teen books, a number of plays, and a movie called Broken Bridges, which Paramount made in around 2006, 2007. It starred Toby Keith, the country star Burt Reynolds, and the late Kelly Preston. About 6 years ago or so, I shifted my direction in writing. I had an idea for a book that I thought would be an excellent children's book. And I had never written one before, an illustrated book. It's a book called The Tree in the Courtyard. It came out in 2016. It is essentially Anne Frank's story told from the point of view of the horse chestnut tree, which was in the secret annex, right behind the secret annex in the courtyard. Anne had a relationship with this tree. She referenced it multiple times. I got the idea reading a New York Times story about the tree coming down in a storm. That's a good story. Then I read that scientists were grafting branches off the down stump and trying to sprout them, and they did. And now these branches the seedlings have been placed around the world. You can see one in New York at the 9/11 memorial, and I visited it. And I was like, okay, this is a great story, great subject for a children's book. Wrote it, and thank goodness it was very successful. It's been translated into 8 languages or so. It was a New York Times Best Illustrated book, and that led to a number of other picture books for kids, of which 21 Steps is about the most recent.
It's beautiful. So do you have a favorite genre or a favorite audience that you like to write for?
Right now, it's exactly what I'm doing. My picture books, I would not recommend them to be read as bedtime stories. Great. To toddlers or kindergartners or maybe even first grade. They tend to be about more sophisticated topics. So right now, but told simply, told in 800, 900, 1,000 words maximum, where the illustrations will add a great deal to the telling of the story. I would say second grade and up.
Yeah, I agree. When I was reading this book, to read it at nighttime, my son is 5, and we read pretty much every night. Usually Pete the Cat, because it's simple. It goes to bed, Peppa Pig. But right. I said, how do I explain this story to him before he goes to bed? There are so many questions. And you reference God in a way that it's sort of like plants that seed, the seeds of questions. It's a wonderful book. And we spoke off camera, too, about mainstream children's books. Is there a lot of faith? Is there a faith element in those books that go out to the secular sort of community? Or?
I would say in 21 Steps, absolutely. But it's right there on the tomb of the unknown soldier, and for your viewers, the book is essentially the story of the tomb of the unknown soldier and the tomb guards who keep watch there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, told from the point of view of the first unknown. But if you go to Washington and you look at the tomb, here lies an American soldier, known but to God. It's right there. And faith was a much more forward element in American society in 1921 when the first unknown was buried. So when I say in the text, this person died nameless and faceless, known but to God, I'm referencing both the tomb itself and the reality of that world. I would say, Craig, that in general, that is about as far as one can go with mainstream publishers. They're mainstream publishers, and there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, school and library sales are super important. And I think there's a sense, whether it is accurate or not, that First Amendment concerns and Establishment Clause concerns in public schools make it less likely that these books are going to be acquired. I mean, I'd argue they're absolutely fine. There's no problem whatsoever going even further than we did in 21 Steps. But we live in an age where people want to avoid controversy, and I sort of get it. Fortunately, there are other publishers out there, smaller presses, and the Catholic Church has, there are many publishers, including Pauline Press, that are willing to go where mainstream publishers aren't on this.
That's a good point. We're actually in the process of creating our first book at the Emmaus Center. We're going to title the company Emmaus Press, and we're working on a faith-based cookbook, and we want to go down that path as well. Did you always write books that had a faith element?
I'm drawn to the subject because I'm a religious person, and I'm not going to say that mainstream presses will not touch it. I mean, I have a Christmas Hanukkah book coming up called The Christmas Mitzvah, which is pro-Jewish, pro-Christian, pro-God, pro-mitzvot, and it is from a mainstream small press, but harder to do with some other kinds of topics. Yet for me, it's natural. Also because I believe kids, we're humans, we're faith-based. If we don't find faith in God, we're going to worship something else.
What do you think? You mentioned something which was interesting. What do you think will happen if because I remember as a kid reading Bernstein Bears, right? Which there was a faith element in a lot of the books. And I remember buying it at the book fair, Scholastics, and my son goes to Catholic school, thank God, so it's different. But in public school, let's say, if they don't have that faith element, if we start taking it out of culture, society, and you said like they'll lean on or they'll focus or worship something else, what is that something else if they remove faith completely from?
Look, I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey in the 1960s and 70s. My faith education did not come in schools. It came at home, and it came at the Teaneck Jewish Community Center, and it came at religious school. And this was an important thing for parents to do. And you hope that it remains an important thing for parents to do. However, now, we live in an age where it is easy to worship at the God of power. You can worship power. You can worship the planet Earth itself. For thousands of years, we've been worshiping money. There's all kinds of possibilities. It's not the same as worshiping the Almighty.
When I see, I'll just say motivational speakers, when they say, pray to the universe or ask the universe, and I'm sitting there saying, what does that do? Like, where has that gotten anyone where they're worshiping or praying to something? You have positive thoughts, and then you get sort of something in return. If I think positive, I have this attraction comes. And I think about that, and I think it's very misleading at times when people talk about, like you said, like worshiping the universe, worshiping money, these false idols.
Well, again, there's no spirit of ethical monotheism there, and both those words are important to me. It is both monotheistic and ethical. I write and think about a God who has a moral purpose and has a moral purpose for us, and that moral purpose is revealed in the Torah. Which for a long time, this was not always my stance on religion and faith. There's some transformational things that happened along the way to get me thinking in this direction. But I know that kids resonate to it. They care, they think about it. If parents raise this at home with their children will spark to it.
I agree. And it's like you said too, like when you grew up, and same thing with me, the domestic church, the foundation of faith. But like most of us, right, we go to college, we get involved in society, and we walk away, or something happens where we lose our faith, or we're not connected, and then we have an awakening, right? Something happens that triggers our connection or relationship with a higher power, right? But because we had that foundation from our family, it's easy for us to go back to it. So what took place in your life where you had this awakening?
I started to study more. I mean, for example, in Judaism, you read through Hebrew Bible on it's a cycle, year-long cycle. Okay, 54 portions, 52 weeks. They're all crammed in there. My Hebrew is not very good to say the best about it. It's actually quite mediocre. So I have one thing I've done. I get a different translation of the Torah, and I take it with me to synagogue, and I will read a different one every year. I mean, right now I'm reading Robert Alter's. A couple of years ago, it was the medieval commentator Sforno, translated into English, his interpretation. Richard Elliott Friedman, the Bible scholar at UC San Diego, did an amazing translation. I'll read that and I'll study. I started studying more. That's really the upshot.
No, I agree. I mean, when I was saying before, same thing with me. I always went to church, sacraments, but then when I had an awakening, I wanted to know every single thing about God, about Christ, about the Bible, and I can pretty much consume my life with learning, constantly learning and reading and watching and just trying to learn as much as I can about who's this Jesus guy. I want to know all about him. I want to know all about the disciples, the apostles, the Paul. And the more I learn and the more I realize I don't know. And the more,
Fortunately, I'm surrounded by people who know a lot more than I do. So that's also a great advantage.
For me, I know when I had my awakening or I started having this transformation, a lot of things that I was comfortable with or happy with or lifestyle choices or temptations or whatever it was, they no longer had an effect on me. Or I started to cut certain things out of my life, certain choices, people, friends, we call it an inventory. What changed in your life when you had this awakening?
There's some practical things and then some other things that are sort of more ephemeral. Practically, for example, I started to keep kosher, but I started to do it slowly. I mean, because for a number of reasons. The first thing I did was for a year, I didn't eat crab. Crab was out of my diet.
I could do without crab.
And then the year after that, I was crab and scallops. That was easy, and then the third year it was crab and scallops and shrimp and lobster. And then the year after that, I was like, okay, right, I think I can do this. Now, by Orthodox Jewish standards, my version of kosher is not anywhere near where they would like it to be. I will eat meat that's not slaughtered, by a kosher slaughterhouse, and chicken the same way, but I don't eat pork. And here's what's great about it. I think about every bite that goes in my mouth, right? Everything that I eat is in some ways tied to God. The other transformation, I think, had to do with the kinds of things that I was writing. I was writing a lot of the book that I wrote before I moved into picture books was basically a spin-off book for World Wrestling Entertainment, I kid you not, called Superfan. And it did quite well, and it was fun to write, and I'll stand by the book. But now that I'm focused on picture books, I'm looking for books and stories that advance the kinds of morals and worldview that matter to me,
I love that. I think that's true for me as well. Now I won't say yes to anything. I have to make sure my convictions are strong enough to where if I say yes to something, I will think about it all day and night. I won't sell my morals, my integrity, my faith. I started off in the secular world in films and TV, and I know how easily, whether they flash the money or the fame or the platform, how easily we could put our morals aside or justify our actions and say, well, it's for, a better or a greater glory, or the next one, I swear, God, I'll sort of repent against it, or I'll do something. Like, we could justify our actions, And now, like you said, you had this awakening, and you're not willing to justify or sell your soul or your morals for a book or an opportunity. But we see that happens a lot in society.
Look, I know, look, it's extremely tempting, and when the world around you says do X, it takes a lot of fortitude not to do X, and for me, fortunately, the stories are out there to tell if I look for them. So look at this book about the tomb of the unknown soldier. You know, that tomb, it's the closest thing we've got in America to a secular, it's a shrine in a way. I mean, you talk to anyone who goes to Arlington and visits it, and they will tell you when they go up there. I thought, what did it feel like to you? Oh, it was quiet. It felt like a pilgrimage. It's respectful. Another young kid said to me, it felt like it went on forever. It's eternal. People also, sort of selflessly sacrificing, like the unknown soldier did from World War I and then World War II and then from Korea, gave everything, name and face, for something larger. Tomb guards, I've met a lot of them. These are interesting young men and women of every race, religion, and creed. When they're out, Native nations even, when they're out there on the mat, they're just tomb guards. They're only Americans. It's just a joy to be able to write about it for young people and watch them responding to the story that they, in many cases, unless they've got someone in the military in their family, they don't know anything about it. I knew very little when I started this project.
No, I agree. I mean, I've heard about it when I started to read it. I was not familiar with even their level of perfection that the tomb guards have. Just reading about it and how long they shine the shoes and the 90-degree angle, I was not familiar with that at all.
Well, not only that, I mean, there's something of an analogy to life. I mean, they strive for perfection. They'll never hit it. They won't hit it. I mean, you go to the tomb, and I was fortunate enough to go in the tomb guard quarters, and they've got videotape facing the mat, and they are critiquing one another. Even if they've been tomb guards for a year and a half or a year and 3/4, they're trying to get close to perfect. We're people. We're never going to be perfect, but if we try our hardest and give our very best, it's amazing what we can attain. Right?
I agree. And now you mentioned off camera that there's 2 other books that you're working on, right? I mean, that are related to our Catholic faith. Can you tell us about some of those books?
It's interesting, and I don't know. I mean, maybe it was the Christmas mitzvah that got me inspired on this. And this is based on a true life story. This book of a Jewish guy named Al Rosen who lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Al was fiercely Jewish, but also loved the Christmas holiday and loved his Christian neighbors. And he was coming home from work on one Christmas Eve and stopped in a gas station, and the attendant came out, and he knew the attendant, and he was like, he couldn't believe it because the attendant he knows is Christian. He's like, why aren't you home with your family? It's Christmas Eve. And the attendant said, my boss is making me work. I'm on graveyard shift. I'll be here all night. Al was so unhappy about this. And this is true. He went home, he called a radio station, and he's like, I'm Al Rosen. I'm Jewish. And if you're Christian and you've got to work tonight, I'll do your job for you for nothing. And that night, Al, tended bar in sort of the moral equivalent of East Rutherford for Milwaukee, like in a working class bar in West Milwaukee. Al didn't drink, never had a drop of alcohol in his life, and he's a bartender. And then he did these mitzvot for the next 35 years. They became local legend in Milwaukee and inspired people of other faiths to work for their compatriots on Yom Kippur, on Christmas, during Ramadan, that kind of thing.
Wow.
One is the story of John Van Hengel, which is a riches to rags story of the man who invented food banks and got the idea while he was cooking at a soup kitchen in Phoenix, Arizona, after he had lost everything. And he started the food banking movement under St. Mary's Church, now St. Mary's Basilica. Their first food bank in the world, St. Mary's Food Bank, still in existence. Feeding America, Second Harvest, all because of Van Hengel. It's a great story. And it's a story about like listening for what God's plan for you is. And he wasn't such a good listener for a part in his life. And then he started listening, and look what he did. And then the second story is the story of the birth of the animal rescue adoption movement in America, which was created by a Roman Catholic convert named Carolyn Earl White in Philadelphia in the 1860s and 70s, when women weren't leading anything. But the women and children of Philadelphia actually started this movement, and hers is a story of a religious transformation and a great piece of service to humanity. So these are a couple of stories I'm working on.
Well, we will support you, and we will definitely be looking forward to reading those books. I'll be reading those books to my son. So, Jeff, how can people find your books or reach out to you through your website?
To find the book, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any bookstore. The book's doing really, really well. It was #1 in its category for a while at Amazon, and there'll be a significant buzz about it heading through Veterans Day and beyond. And then Christmas Mitzvah also at those same outlets. To find me, my Jeff Gottesfeld is not a very common name. I'm easy to find on the web. My website is jeffgottesfeldwriter.com. I'm Jeff Gottesfeld at Twitter, Jeff Gottesfeld Writer at Instagram.
We'll definitely keep in contact. I'll be looking forward to reading your Christmas Mitzvah. It looks like a great book. That's a wonderful story. Should be a film if anyone's listening. But Jeff, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Okay. Have a beautiful month, and we'll talk again sometime.
Jeff, thank you so much. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember, you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through your words and actions. God bless you.